When you learn Chinese, there is one grammatical particle that you will hear over and over again. While you might have to listen closely to hear it, it is there. It's this character, le, and it's guaranteed to confuse you. Alright guys, here we go. So of all of the intricacies of Chinese grammar, how to use le is probably the most difficult thing for foreign speakers to learn. Now, the real problem here is an education problem. It's that most of us learn in our beginning Chinese classes that it's kind of a past tense marker. It's not really true, though it's also not entirely false. But I'm getting way ahead of myself, so let me explain to you what's going on. Okay, so this character le was almost certainly originally pronounced liao. It originally meant to complete or to finish and was originally just a verb. As this Chinese Wiktionary page succinctly explains, the verb liao eventually was used so commonly that it turned into the grammatical particle le. And the Etymological Dictionary of Old Chinese traces the use of this character back to right around the Tang Dynasty. Alright, I won't bore you guys too much with the details, but I did do a few searches over on the Chinese text project at ctext.org. Now, you can find liao in old text, sure, but it's usually written with a different character. And yeah, Chinese does start to get confusing when you realize that there are different characters that mean the same thing and that are pronounced the same way, and they're really the same characters, but they look totally different. And at this time, you can't really blame the simplification in mainland China in the 1950s. Because that form of liao was written with the more simplified character a long time ago, and on and on and on. This is all for another video, so look for one coming up eventually on the difference between simplified traditional Chinese and all the fun debate around that. Anyway, here we're going to focus on le and what it means. The important thing here is to remember that older meaning of the character. It was a verb originally that meant to finish. Now, any good grammar book is going to connect le with liao, though sometimes the explanation might be confusing, like in this one. So you don't see liao very much by itself these days, but you do see it in certain words, such as liao jie, or to understand. Here it is pronounced liao. Now, there are so many compound words where it's pronounced liao that I can't possibly cover them all today, so I'll just give you a few really quick examples. For example, yi liao bai liao is an idiom that means all of your troubles end when the main trouble ends, and it kind of has an implication of death associated with it. So you get a sentence like 这件事一定要当事人出面才能一了百了, which means that the only way that we can solve this problem for once and for all is if the person responsible comes out to deal with it. On a more happy note, you've got words like liao zhang, which means to pay off a debt, something that I think all of us kind of need to do eventually. You can say 领薪时记得来了账, or when you get your salary, remember to come pay off your debt. Anyway, I could go on and on and on with tons of these examples. The thing is that liao always has a sense of finishing or completing whenever it shows up. So if you understand something and you say, well, liao jie, it's almost like saying you totally understand it. You understand it till it's finished. Or like when I think of jie, I think of like jie kai, to open something up. So you've taken the concept, opened it up, and you have finished completely understanding it. That's the idea that you have with the word liao jie. Now, there is another version of liao using the same character that serves as a verb complement, and this is where things already will get confusing for you, especially if you're a beginner. So buckle your safety belts because this one is going to be a bumpy ride. Okay, there's this really frustrating thing about Chinese when you start learning it called verb complements. These are the things that come at the end of verbs. To put this in basic terms, Chinese is a language that naturally loves having all sorts of stuff added at the end of the verb to tell you how the verb did the verb, how it turned out in the end. So right here, for example, you say 他修好了我的汽车, or he fixed my car. You can't really say 他修了我的汽车. It doesn't sound so natural. It's really helpful to have that how in there. I know that I'm opening Pandora's box by talking about this stuff, since we have to get into talking about why Chinese really likes to have 2 or 4 character phrases and all of that stuff. But today we're just going to focus on liao and le here to help avoid you getting way too confused and to make it so that I don't start rambling off into some crazy place. Now, the verb complements do not just tell you how somebody did something, like if they did it well or if they did a really crappy job. No, they also tell you whether something is possible, whether something can be done or not. And that's where we start to see liao in the sense of to complete come into play. The technical term for this is a potential complement, and it always includes either de or bu. De means that it can happen, and bu means that it can't happen. So the sentence here says 婴儿还端不了奶, or that baby can't be weaned from breast milk just yet. The 不了 part right here means that it's got negative potential. You cannot do this, it's impossible to do this right now, and so on. Here's another example. 他这样说我受不了, or I can't bear what he's saying. Now, you do need to know that you can turn this around. So you can ask a question like 你受得了吗? Or can you bear it? Can you put up with it? That duh means that it's possible. Remember that. The bu would mean that it's not possible. So if I asked you 你受不了吗? It would mean can't you take care of it? Can't you bear it? Can't you just hold on and grit on for a little while longer? See what I mean? So when you see one of these phrases with a potential complement, in other words, when you see the duh or the bu in front of that, la looking character, the liao, you know that you need to read it as liao, not as la. And now we're going to get into the really fun stuff. Now, when we talk about la, we're usually talking in terms of aspect. That's a really hard grammatical principle to solve because it works differently in every different language. My Google search for how aspect works in English came up with these two sentences, and they can kind of help you understand what we're talking about here. In the first one, Tilly is eating her breakfast. In other words, she's not done yet. It's an ongoing and incomplete activity. In the second, Tilly has eaten her breakfast. She has already eaten. This is something that we call the perfect aspect. Okay, that's all that you need to understand to figure out what we mean when we say aspect. You don't need to dive into learning all the linguistic terms. You don't need to go take a bunch of linguistic classes because that's basically like learning another language. What we care about on this channel is practical language learning, not about diving into linguistics and finding out some sort of stupid, crazy, weird, whatever. Now, the thing is that in Chinese, aspect does the same thing. It tells us if an activity is ongoing or if it's completed or what's happening with it. And la is one of the most important particles for showing aspect. So right here, for example, it says 我已经吃饭了, or I've already eaten. You have to have the la here because it signifies that the verb 吃饭, or to eat, has been finished. I have eaten. Even though the adverb 已经 over here gives you a hint that the eating is done, you still have to have the la at the end. So, for example, if I were to say 我已经吃饭, that sentence is incorrect. It's missing something. It's missing the la. I mean, it kind of cringes me to say it, right? It's just wrong, right? Also, the sentence 我吃饭 is also incorrect. You absolutely have to have the aspect marker somewhere in the sentence. I will show you another example. This sentence right here, 你吃饭了吗, is one of the most common sentences that you're going to encounter in day-to-day Chinese. But you absolutely have to have the la here. It indicates that the person is asking you if you have already finished eating. So if I were going to ask you 你吃饭吗, that would be a totally bizarre question. If you don't have that aspect particle la, it sounds like I'm asking you if you eat food in general. So it's almost like if you were going to say 我不吃饭 or whatever, it would be like you're some sort of superhuman that can live without eating, It doesn't make any sense. Chinese verbs really need the aspect particles to make any sense. Now, I'll put it to you this way. I remember being a Chinese student years and years ago, and we come across something like this, and I would kind of laugh and be like, oh, this teacher doesn't know what they're talking about, right? We can always say sort of crazy, weird, whatever things. You got to take this on because the language really does work like this. You can't just say some bizarre thing and come up with some bizarre sentence. People will think that, there's something wrong with you. So, just listen to how other people say it and say it that way and try to understand why. Now, okay, so you do need the aspect particles in Chinese verbs for it to make any sense. Now that we understand that, we can start getting to some of the more complicated things that la does for us. For example, it can help us string our narrative along. For example, this sentence right here, 他写完了时, is incomplete. You need a phrase at the end to continue the thought. If we were to say instead 他写完时了, however, it would be correct. He finished writing the poem. In other words, in this first sentence, there is a natural implication that something came after he wrote the poem. And that is because la is between the verb and the object, between writing and the poem. So you should say something like 他写完了时就去睡觉了, or he went to bed as soon as he finished writing the poem. And notice that there's another la at the end of the sentence. That's because he's completed the activity of going to sleep. This is where la can indicate the past tense. So, are you confused yet? I hope that you're confused because this is supposed to be pretty confusing, isn't it? But let me give you a more concrete example. This is one that's not from a textbook. This actually comes from my own family. Now, here's a sentence you might say to your child. 你写完了作业去睡觉吧, or you ought to go to bed as soon as you're done with your homework. Notice here that there's only one le since we're not describing something that the kid did in the past. The kid is going to bed in the future. But you still need to have that first le there to indicate that they should do something after they've done their homework. So in other words, the right way to understand how le works is by keeping in mind its definition as finishing or completing an activity. I want to emphasize that, right? The easiest way to learn this is to keep that in mind instead of trying to memorize what aspect means or reading one of these really stupid grammar books that tells you all sorts of stuff that you just don't understand. Just remember that it's for finishing and completing for the most part. It is not a past tense marker, though you can use it to indicate that something happened in the past. Why? Because it's a completed activity. And it all depends upon where in the sentence you stick le. That can be really tricky because of the topic marker particle. Oh, you remember that topic, the topic focus sentence? So let's go mess that sentence up a little bit and see how you do. 作业写完了去睡觉吧 means the same thing. You ought to go to bed as soon as you've done your homework. This sentence actually feels more natural because the topic of the sentence is the homework. That's why it's the first thing that we list. And notice that there's no pronoun because it's implied. It's obvious that I'm talking to my child because I'm talking to my child who's standing right in front of me. You still need the le there, however, to show the aspect of the verb 写. So a lot of people will tell you that this is the sort of grammatical thing that you need to develop a feel for. I agree. This is the reason why I say that you need to watch a lot of TV dramas and a lot of movies. And you need to find something that you actually enjoy watching. Don't watch a whole bunch of crap that you don't want to watch. Find something that you like with characters that are interesting and stuff. And make sure that you spend some time watching TV. This will help you a lot. But you also need to understand how this works so that you can use it correctly. And there are a couple of really strange things about le that will foul you up if you don't understand them. So for example, this sentence here, 明天你下了课来找我, is going to be really confusing if you think that le is a past tense marker. Because this is clearly a future tense sentence. Come and see me when you finish your class tomorrow. The le is a lot easier to understand here when you know that it indicates the completion aspect, not just the past tense. Come see me when the class is finished, when it's done. This is the same. 我写完了3封信就去睡觉, or I will go to bed once I finished writing 3 letters. Again, this is a future tense sentence, and le clearly indicates completion. It's got nothing to do with the tense of the sentence. So the reason why this is so difficult for us to learn when we didn't grow up in a Chinese-speaking environment is because the Chinese language is the Chinese language. What I mean by that is that Chinese is not English, it's not German, it's not French, it's not Latin, it's not Korean, it's not Japanese. All of these languages do this exact same thing one way or another, but they do it totally differently, right? Even the Chinese dialects do this differently than Mandarin, though they generally will use the same idea behind verb complements and all the other jazz. If you go learn Korean, if you learn Japanese, you will learn completely different ways to handle these problems. And native speakers of Korean and Japanese struggle with using aspect correctly in Chinese when they speak Chinese. I know because I know a lot of them. This is what Germans call das Sprachgefühl. This is the feeling for the language. Now, let's see if we can explain some of the more complex aspects of le. You tend to see le in what we call narrative sentences, which are sentences that report events that have taken place. 孩子从屋子里跑了出来 means that the child came out of the room. It's an action that has already taken place. So if you're reading a novel, you might see a sentence like this. 海面上飞来了很多海鸥. Many seagulls came flying over the surface of the sea. Here, the le means that this is an action that has taken place in the past. It's common for Chinese narrative structure in things like books. In contrast, you've also got expository sentences. These are sentences that tell you some kind of fact, and they don't use le at all. 地球是圆的 is a factual statement, and there's no need for le here because the Earth is just what it is. Nothing has been completed or whatever. Okay, so of course there are some people out there who don't think that the Earth is round. And for the purposes of this video in Chinese grammar, it's perfectly fine. So if you were to come over to me and say, 地球是平的, or the Earth is flat, you still have a factual expository sentence. It's just that we disagree on whether the fact is correct or not, but the sentence style is an expository factual sentence. And I'm going somewhere with this, so stick with me. So, if you write an expository sentence that describes past action, you will use the grammatical particle 过 instead of le. 我吃过蜗牛 means I've eaten snails before, and if you're saying that, I'm guessing that you're probably French. If we say 我吃了蜗牛, then we would have an incomplete sentence. We're waiting to see what happened after you ate the snail. Maybe you felt sick, maybe you ran a marathon, maybe you kissed your best friend, who knows? If we say 我吃蜗牛了, it means that the thing that you ate was a snail. Maybe somebody asked you like what it is that you ate, and you reply 我吃蜗牛了, I ate the snail. So do you see the difference here? So the sentence with 过 is just telling us that this event happened at some point in time in the past. The one with le at the end tells us that you completed this activity. And when you stick le between the verb and the object, you are leaving your audience in suspense because we have to know, it's imperative for us to know what happened after you ate that snail. That's what happens when you put le between 吃 and 蜗牛. Now it's time to look at some sentences that otherwise might be confusing to you. So, 我们去过Shanghai means we have been to Shanghai. In other words, this is a factual thing that happened at some point in time in the past. There was some time where we went there. 我们去了 Shanghai is narrative, but I don't really like the explanation here because I think it's wrong. There's this feeling that you need to continue your story. You need to tell us what happened in Shanghai. You know, like 我们去了 Shanghai, 然后 blah, 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 blah. 我们去上海了 is not in the book that I'm using, but if you were to say that, this would mean that you are specifying that the place that you went to is Shanghai and not Nanjing or Suzhou or Tianjin or Yanbian or any of my other favorite cities in China. Okay, so hopefully now you have an idea of what the difference is between guo and le, at least sort of a basic idea. But we're not done with this yet. You see, le doesn't just mean that something was finished. It can also mean that something has changed. And yeah, it's the same character and we're using it the same way, which is the reason why this is confusing. So let's look at some examples. Okay, here you go. 我妹妹会说日文了, or my younger sister can speak Japanese. The implication is that she can speak Japanese now, as in she couldn't speak it before. If you were to say 我妹妹会说日文, you could say this. This is a correct sentence. It also means my younger sister can speak Japanese. But here you do not have that implication of her not speaking it before. So is that an important distinction to make? Well, sometimes it is important, sometimes it's not important, and sometimes you have absolutely no choice. 他看电影了 means he has gone to see the movie, but the implication from le is that something has changed, so maybe he hated going to the movies before. Now in this one, 时间不早了, or it's getting late, you absolutely have to use le because it was early before, but it's not early now. And in this one, 我吃饱了, you absolutely must use le because you were not full before, but now you are full. Anyway, there are tons and tons of these examples, and you'll see them pop up like all the time. It's not that important to get in and analyze it and say, oh, well, what kind of le is used here and how is it used? What's the grammatical function of it or whatever? That's not important. What's important is that you know that it has this function and that you hear a lot of sentences and see a lot of sentences in which that function is used, and you can like have a basic idea of how it's used, right? If you combine that level of understanding things with like watching a lot of TV or chatting with your friends in Chinese or something, it's going to become a lot easier, right? The thing to understand about this type of le is that they include some kind of change. And you know, trust me, I could just talk and analyze this forever. I really like doing it. But there are also a few other things that le can do as well. So for example, you can use it to show that something is better or worse than you expected. So in this sentence here, 这条裙子漂亮极了, this means that this skirt is amazingly pretty, something I say to my wife all the time. You should notice that the 极了 following an adjective here indicates that the adjective is to an extreme extent. It's a set phrase, and when you use it, you have to have le at the end. 屋子里闷死了 means it's extremely stuffy in this room, so stuffy that you're going to suffocate. Now this is exaggerated, of course, but you need that le at the end to show that exaggeration. Now this also works for telling somebody to do something, such as 不要哭了, in other words, stop crying right now, or right now go from the state of crying to the state of not crying. And this is why you see le used often with other sentence-ending particles like ba and so on. In fact, so a lot of the sentence final particles that I talked about the other day basically will do the same thing that le has done here. You can also use them to soften or feminize your language. So you can change le to liao or lo or something like that. This works especially well if you're like, say, a young, cute girl from Taiwan. Le also helps us sum up actions since it naturally leads from one thing to another. Here you have 他洗了脸, 刷了牙, 脱了衣服, 上床睡觉去了. Because you've got the le in all of these places between the verb and its complement or its object, you know that the narration will continue. And at the end, the le tells us that the entire action has been completed. In other words, this isn't like a command or a suggestion or whatever. And here we get to the point finally where we're talking some literature. So it's been a long video, I know, but now we're getting to the part where this helps us read old books like Dream of the Red Chamber. You see, this stuff comes up in Chinese novels all the time. In fact, it's a very good example of very good Chinese writing. So here's a really good example of this. 天黑了，路上的行人越来越少了，商店也一家接一家的关门了。他觉得饿了，可是钱花完了，走着走着他哭起来了。Or it was dark, there were fewer people on the street, all the stores were closed, one after another. She was hungry, but she had spent all of her money. She walked and began to cry. Now, in this case, the le doesn't have the same natural flow as it did before, since it's coming after the verb complements, not before them. However, what le does here is it stresses the new circumstance at every step. First, it's dark, then there are fewer people on the street, then the stores are closing, then she's hungry, and on and on and on. Like I said, this is a really good way to make great literature. I've read a whole ton of message board posts about le, and there are all sorts of people who say that it's meaningless, including many native speakers. But the thing is that it's not meaningless. None of these particles are meaningless. It actually means a great deal and is really important to understand if you want to know how to actually speak the language. The fact that it's complex and confusing does not mean that it's unimportant. Now, despite the fact that Dream of the Red Chamber was composed something like 250 years ago, we can see the exact same usage of le in this book. For example, when Jia Baoyu sees Lin Dayu for the first time, grandmother Jia asks him why he changed clothes before coming to meet her. She says, 外客没见就脱了衣裳了, or before meeting our guests, you took off your clothes. Notice that there are two le characters here. The first one indicates that change of state from wearing the ceremonial clothes to not wearing them, and the second sort of finishes the whole idea off. So there's a lot of discussion on the internet about what it means when you've got the two le characters in a sentence like this one. I don't want to get too deep into it other than to note that in this case, you absolutely have to have the second le. If you don't have the second le there, then grandmother Jia's sentence is not finished yet. She's got to add something in after 脱了衣裳, something like 过来, or you came here after you did that. That is because the le is in between the verb 脱 and the complement 衣裳. But when you add that second le to the end of the sentence, that helps finish the sentence. This is just how the language works. Let's look at another example from that same short paragraph. Then there's this part right here. 归了座 细看时真是与众个别. Again, the le keeps the narrative going. 归, or to go back as the verb 坐, is the verb complement and means the seat, so going back to the seat, and the le in the middle means that the part that follows comes immediately after he went back to a seat. And then at the end, of course, you've got this poem where Lin Dayu is described as gorgeous and a thin woman who is more perceptive than Bi Gan and 3 times as sickly as Xi Shi. So that's a wonderful mental image to end on, isn't it? But if you notice, if you go back and look at it again, you will notice that 归了座, after 归了座, there's more to the sentence that comes, right? The sentence does not just end with that. Anyway, hopefully this helps some of you who are struggling with this language, right? We've all been there. Sometimes we're still there. I will tell you that I still have my struggles with the language, and it's a lot of fun. Now, it is true, though, that you will pick up on this stuff when you have more exposure to the language, but it also will help you to dig in and study it. Don't forget, however, to give yourself time to be exposed to the language. This includes active exposure, so watch TV, and I don't know if you want to take notes, but like listen to what they say, figure out what they're saying, pause the show, go listen to it again. But also you want some passive exposure, you veg out on the couch and watch a Chinese TV show. If you go onto Netflix, you can find a whole bunch of them from Taiwan. Some of them are good, some of them are questionable. It's all right, have fun and explore, right? Now, the thing is that it's true that there's not a whole bunch of native Chinese speakers who have written like academic articles that talk about the use of particles like le. The reason why is because this is an ingrained part of the language. It's the sort of thing that you know if you grow up in the environment because you hear it all the time. When you have a small child, if you talk with like a 3-year-old in Chinese who grew up speaking it natively, they know instinctively how to use le because they've heard it their whole life, right? That's the thing you have to realize. This is also the sort of thing that will mark you clearly as a foreigner if you use it incorrectly. Now, if you really want to come off as a native speaker, focusing on how to use le is definitely worth your time and your energy. Anyway, I hope that this helps you. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'm kind of scared of saying that because I don't know what you're going to ask. And thanks for watching. We'll have more next week.